In this video, we're going to get into several different methods of routing for internal instruments, which we call virtual instruments, and using external MIDI devices. In this case, we're going to use the Proteus 2000 that we just set up in our audio MIDI setup. So let's first create a MIDI track to work with an external MIDI device. We're going to set this to go out to Proteus channel 1. And I'm going to go ahead and call this drums for right now. We're just going to use some drums to play. And I'm going to go into my patch change dialog box. We're going to pull up this drum kit right here. And now, in order for me to hear this particular device, because when I record Enable right now, but I do not have any way of hearing the audio back from the external device. So in order to hear it, we need to route the audio output of our Proteus back into our audio interface. So in order to monitor our input correctly from the external MIDI device, we need to create an aux track. Command-Shift-N, create a mono aux. Now I could have created a stereo aux if I'm dealing with stereo instruments, but this example I'm only creating drums or kicks just to get a mono effect coming in. Later we will discuss about how to record the audio down into separate tracks. This is very useful for when we're getting into mixing. So what we're going to do is set up my input to receive input number 1. And we are now getting the signal from this. Now do ignore the signal that's coming in on the aux right now. This is my microphone for the moment. But what we are going to explain here is what most engineers like to actually do. And this is where they command click on the S. And this is called a solo safe. What this does is allow the signal always to pass through that track no matter what. This allows greater flexibility for doing MIDI editing and all your sequencing with MIDI before you start even thinking about recording it down as audio. So you may want to do pitch changes, velocity, duration changes, quantization, all kinds of things that may make more sense to deal with on the MIDI side before we start recording it down as audio. So let's go ahead and name this track for right now. I'm going to call this Proteus. Prot for short. I'm going to just call it aux. So that's pretty important. Command click solo and then naming the track. So right now I should be able to hear my individual snares and my kicks and my instruments from that device. And again, this is not using anything inside Pro Tools. I'm using an external MIDI device and I'm routing the MIDI up through this particular inputs and outputs. And then I'm using the audio inputs and outputs for the actual analog signaling. Now in the MIDI track, I could go on the input and choose to have a different input. Right now, I only have a keyboard, so I'm just going to use all channels right now. But this is really unique because I could have any external MIDI device triggering the Proteus, and this can actually give you a lot more control over how you want to manipulate the Proteus. So for example, I may have drum pads on an external MIDI device that I want to trigger my Proteus instead of using keys on a keyboard. To me, I like to actually use drum pads to do drums. It just makes more sense. But you may find yourself using only a keyboard, and these are just options that you have. So I'm just going to set this to be all. So you'll notice I already have a click track that I've created, and if we pull up our transport, we already have our metronome set up. We have our conductor turned on. We have our metronome turned on, so we should be hearing the click now. So let's go ahead and hit the 3 key and record some kicks and snares in. So now you can hear it play back. Alright, so there is actually a little bit of quantizing going on, and we will get into that a little bit later on. But for right now, you guys can see that the MIDI information is recorded in without the audio. Now let's work with virtual instruments. If you Command-Shift-N and create a MIDI track, Command-Shift-N, we're going to create a mono. Let's create a stereo aux in this case. We are now going to go into our inserts, pull up our inserts. Now as soon as we click on our inserts and we add our instrument, let's use expand. I now can go inside my MIDI track and choose that as my device. Now Expand has 4 channels. If you go into the actual virtual instrument, you can see that I can set each one of these to have individual channels. So right now they're all set to channel 1, and we're going to keep our individual parts at channel 1. So what's very different about this particular arrangement I want to point out is that I cannot click on the patch change dialog box to change patches. You'll notice that it does not change my patches in my instrument. So we have to do something completely different here. We have to go inside our plugin, and we can go into the factory default, and we can pull up all our different sounds within here. We can also go into this little patch icon right here and pull up our different settings. So let's say we want to work with some electric pianos and clavs, and now we've got these individual patches that we can call up. So I'm going to hit OK, and now when I hit record enable, I should be able to get that instrument. Now let's take this a step further. I'm going to go ahead and delete these tracks now. And I'm going to create a instrument track. Let's create a stereo instrument track. What a stereo instrument track does is it incorporates both MIDI and the aux track all as one. This saves a tremendous amount of time. So if you go into your edit window view selector and you choose instrument view, you have the ability to choose your individual IOs for your MIDI side. You have a mute and so forth. And then you have your individual inserts for working with virtual instruments. So again, let's go ahead and use the virtual instrument. I'm going to pull up instrument. Notice how it automatically assigned this instrument to my MIDI output. Very, very cool. So we can now record enable and get the same exact results from one individual track. Now in Pro Tools 8 you have the ability to do 32. If you're in Pro Tools 9 you can do quite a bit more. So you're going to find you're going to run out of CPU and processing power probably way before you even really max out how many instrument tracks you can work in Pro Tools. So they do take up extra power to run. Now if you go into your mixer, you can see that I have the ability to even pull up my instrument view here. If I go into this drop down and I pull up instrument view, I can call up my mutes for my MIDI that's being recorded. So let's just go ahead and record some MIDI information in here so you can see how this is actually being applied. So I'm going to go ahead and set up my patch to be a piano, just something really simple. Alright, so it's loading up the samples and it's now ready to go. So now let's record. Alright, something just really simple. And now you can see that it's just MIDI information, but it is playing through this individual aux on this particular portion. If I go into my mixer view, you can see that I can mute the MIDI information and it does not play back the data. Whereas I click on this and it is playing the information. So you can see how this is a really simple way of working with internal versus external instruments inside Pro Tools. So hopefully this makes a lot of sense, and I encourage you guys to really experiment and enjoy this process.